Have you ever wondered what the world will look like in just a few years? Picture this: rivers running dry, cities submerged in water, and fields that once fed millions turned to dust. Bill Gates has sounded the alarm, and his message is stark. Humanity has less than 7 years to stop a climate catastrophe that will change life as we know it. He doesn't call this a prediction. He calls it a warning. Gates has spent years urging the world to confront the looming climate crisis, but his recent statements have taken on a new urgency. He warns that the next 7 years are critical, not just for curbing emissions, but for determining whether humanity can survive the climate apocalypse that's already unfolding. From unprecedented floods in Pakistan that displaced millions, to droughts in Africa pushing entire nations toward famine, the world is bearing the scars of a climate unraveling at terrifying speed. Gates calls these disasters the early tremors of a full-blown collapse. Think about what's already happening. In the United States, cities like Phoenix are becoming uninhabitable as temperatures soar past record highs. In Europe, the Rhine River, an economic lifeline for millions, has hit dangerously low levels, choking trade and threatening livelihoods. And in South Asia, monsoon rains are no longer a blessing. They've become weapons of destruction, sweeping away homes, crops, and hope. Gates points to these events and asks, are these disasters merely random, or are they warnings we've ignored for too long? But this isn't just about melting glaciers and raging wildfires. Gates argues that the true danger lies in the ripple effects: food systems collapsing, economies unraveling, and entire regions becoming uninhabitable. Imagine going to the grocery store and finding empty shelves because droughts wiped out crops. Imagine a world where billions are forced to migrate, triggering conflicts over dwindling resources. This isn't dystopian fiction, it's the trajectory Gates says we're on if immediate action isn't taken. Yet Gates doesn't just talk about the problems. He points to solutions, but warns that they require unprecedented global cooperation. Clean energy, sustainable farming, and massive reductions in greenhouse gas emissions are no longer optional. They're our only path to survival. And the clock is ticking. Gates says that if we fail to act by 2030, the world will pass the point of no return, a tipping point where the damage becomes irreversible. What makes this personal? Look around you. The extreme weather events Gates warns about aren't happening in distant lands. They're in your backyard. Hurricanes battering coastal towns, wildfires choking the air with smoke, and heat waves that make stepping outside a gamble. Every degree the planet warms, every delay in action, makes these events more frequent and more devastating. Gates's question hangs heavy. Can we stop this before it's too late? As the next 7 years unfold, humanity will face choices that determine the fate of generations to come. Gates has issued his warning, but the question remains, will we listen? And if we don't, what kind of world will be left behind? Imagine a world where the air burns your lungs, crops wither before they can grow, and oceans swallow entire coastlines. This is not a distant future. It's happening now. Bill Gates calls it the silent collapse, a chain reaction of disasters triggered by humanity's unchecked assault on the planet. And the signs are all around us. Start with the floods. In Pakistan, over a third of the country was submerged in water last year. Entire communities were erased, millions left homeless, and the damage cost billions of dollars. Gates sees these floods not as isolated events, but as the start of a terrifying pattern. As global temperatures rise, the atmosphere holds more moisture, leading to storms of unprecedented ferocity. Coastal cities, home to over 600 million people, are now on the front lines of this war against nature. Jakarta, Bangkok, Miami, these aren't just names. They're battlegrounds, and the water is winning. Then there's the drought. In East Africa, rains that once sustained life have vanished. Crops fail season after season, and livestock die in the millions. Entire populations are being pushed to the brink of starvation. Gates warns that droughts like these will become the new normal. By 2030, he predicts, half the world's population could face water shortages. Think about that. Half the world, billions of people fighting over something as basic as water. But it doesn't stop there. The ripple effects of these disasters are creating what Gates calls the climate cascade. Floods destroy farmland, leading to food shortages. Droughts wipe out crops, driving up prices. The result? A global food crisis. Already, wheat production in major exporting countries like the US, India, and Ukraine has plummeted. In some places, basic staples are becoming luxuries. Gates warns that if the world doesn't act, this cascade could spiral into mass starvation and conflict. And the earth itself is rebelling. Wildfires are devouring forests at an unprecedented rate. releasing massive amounts of carbon into the atmosphere and accelerating the cycle of destruction. In Canada and California, entire towns have been turned to ash in hours. The Amazon rainforest, often called the lungs of the earth, is losing its ability to absorb carbon. Instead, it's becoming a source of emissions, flipping from a shield against climate change to a driver of it. Gates calls this a tipping point, a moment when nature itself begins to work against us. What does this mean for you? Look beyond the headlines. The price hikes at the grocery store, the smog-filled skies, the water restrictions in your city, they're all connected. Gates says the choices we make today will determine whether these problems remain manageable or escalate into a global catastrophe. He warns that humanity is dangerously close to the point of no return. Yet, Gates also offers hope. He insists that the technology to fight climate change already exists. Renewable energy sources like solar and wind can replace fossil fuels. Innovations in agriculture can help crops survive harsher conditions, and policies that prioritize sustainability can prevent further damage. But there's a catch. It all depends on action, immediate, coordinated, and bold action. Without it, Gates says, we're choosing collapse. Every day we delay, the risks grow. Every ton of carbon emitted pushes us closer to irreversible damage. The time for debate is over. The question is no longer what's happening. It's whether we'll do anything to stop it. But can humanity overcome its own inertia before it's too late? Imagine a future where survival becomes a privilege. Bill Gates warns that if humanity doesn't act now, the climate crisis will not just devastate the environment. It will redefine what it means to live in this world. By 2030, he says, we could reach a point where the damage is irreversible, and the systems we rely on, food, water, energy, will begin to collapse. Start with food. Gates points to a chilling reality. The world's food supply is under siege. Droughts, floods, and shifting weather patterns are decimating crops, and the consequences are global. In countries like India and China, once reliable monsoons are failing, leaving millions without water for irrigation. In the U.S., the Midwest, often called the world's breadbasket, is facing record heat waves. These heat waves are scorching farmland. Wheat, rice, corn, these staples of human life are growing harder to produce. Gates warns that food insecurity is no longer a problem for the future. It's here, and it's spreading. The implications are staggering. Rising food prices are already pushing millions into poverty. Families are being forced to choose between feeding their children or paying their bills. Gates highlights how this isn't just a humanitarian crisis, it's a catalyst for unrest. Hunger breeds desperation, and desperation leads to conflict. From riots over food shortages to wars over arable land, the dominoes are falling and the stakes are rising. But it's not just food. Gates points to water as the next great battleground. Already, rivers that sustain billions of lives are drying up. The Colorado River, lifeline of the American Southwest, is at historic lows, threatening water supplies for cities like Las Vegas and Los Angeles. The Yangtze in China, the Nile in Africa, the Ganges in India, these mighty rivers are shrinking, their lifeblood drained by overuse and climate change. Gates predicts that water scarcity will soon displace millions, triggering mass migrations that could overwhelm nations and destabilize entire regions. Energy, too, is at a breaking point. As the planet heats up, demand for electricity is soaring, but traditional power grids aren't designed to handle the strain. Blackouts have become more common, leaving millions without air conditioning during deadly heat waves, or heating during freezing winters. Gates warns that without a transition to renewable energy, our dependence on fossil fuels will not only accelerate climate change, but also leave us vulnerable to crippling energy crises. And then there's the human cost, the lives lost, the families torn apart, the dreams abandoned. Gates reminds us that the victims of this crisis are not abstract numbers. They are farmers watching their fields turn to dust. They are parents searching for food as prices skyrocket. They are children growing up in a world where survival feels uncertain. This isn't a distant problem. It's a reality unfolding in real time, and every one of us is part of the story. But Gates also sees a path forward. He emphasizes that humanity's ingenuity is its greatest weapon. Innovations in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and carbon capture technology can still turn the tide. Countries are already investing in solutions like solar farms, wind turbines, and electric vehicles. Gates calls these advancements the tools of survival, but warns that they're only as effective as the will to use them. Governments, corporations, and individuals must act in unison, or the opportunity will slip away. The clock is ticking. Every second wasted pushes us closer to the brink. Gates stresses that the choices made in the next 7 years will shape the planet for centuries to come. Will we rise to the challenge, or will we allow apathy and inaction to seal our fate? The question is no longer if change is coming, it's whether we'll fight for it before it's too late. The year 2030 looms like a shadow over humanity's future. Bill Gates has made it clear, if we fail to act now, we'll cross an irreversible threshold. This is not a distant prophecy, it's a stark warning grounded in science. A tipping point where the effects of climate change accelerate beyond control, locking us into a future of destruction and suffering. Gates calls this the point of no return, and every passing moment inches us closer. Picture a world after 2030. Rising seas swallow iconic cities, New York, London, Tokyo. Entire nations like the Maldives disappear beneath the waves, their people scattered as refugees with nowhere to go. Crops fail across continents, not from occasional droughts, but from a relentless cycle of heat waves and floods. The global economy collapses under the pressure of food shortages, energy crises, and resource wars. Gates warns that this isn't science fiction. It's a glimpse of the reality we're racing toward. The Earth itself is already rebelling. Wildfires rage in places once thought immune, like Siberia and the Arctic, sending plumes of smoke that circle the globe. Glaciers and ice sheets are melting faster than ever recorded, raising sea levels and threatening millions. Ecosystems that sustain life, coral reefs, rainforests, wetlands, are collapsing. Species vanish daily, their absence unraveling the intricate web of life on which we all depend. Gates sees these events not as random occurrences, but as symptoms of a planet under siege. But amid the darkness, Gates insists there is still hope. He believes humanity has the tools to fight back, but only if we act immediately. Renewable energy sources like wind and solar have the potential to replace fossil fuels entirely. Innovations in carbon capture technology could begin to reverse the damage we've done to the atmosphere. Sustainable farming techniques could ensure food security even in an unpredictable climate. Yet these solutions mean nothing without global cooperation and urgent implementation. Gates emphasizes the role of individuals. He reminds us that every choice matters: what we buy, how we vote, and what we demand from leaders. Change starts with accountability, and Gates urges people everywhere to hold governments and corporations responsible for their actions or inaction. But he also stresses that time is not on our side. Without dramatic, immediate efforts, the window for meaningful change will close. What does this mean for you? It means the future of the planet is in your hands. The world you know, the world you'll leave for the next generation, depends on choices made today. It's not just about grand policies or billion-dollar innovations. It's about everyday actions. Gates' words resonate. If we fail now, there's no second chance. Before you go, take a step toward making a difference. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed about the realities shaping our world. Every conversation, every shared idea, and every informed action contributes to a global movement for survival. You're not just a witness, you're a part of this story. The question isn't whether the world will change, it's whether we'll act in time to shape that change. The time to decide is now.